Chapter 1. Sass Collier's heart quailed as the door sealed softly and locked, with only 8 people in the room. Here in the bowels of Herb Security would be their true trial, not that public travesty earlier, outdoors lit by the tiger-striped gas giant when the ringleaders were shot. Yet neither her lawyer nor her boss were present. Just the Petticreek 5 along one side of the conference table, facing off against the tribunal sitting in judgment. Theo Anderson, the city's director of civics, the mayor, made a show of clicking on the recorder. This hearing is in session. Let's begin. Of the directors who ruled the moon's capital city of Mahina actual, Theo wielded less power than most. Marshal Collier. I object. Kendra Oliver spat from his right elbow, director of security. That traitorous harlot is no longer a marshal. The petite blonde pit viper was Sass's boss's boss. I object to your objection, Sass sniped back. She held the center of the defendant's side of the table directly across from the mayor, as leader of the traitors. Bitch? Theo quirked a lip boyishly. Ladies, fine. Let's dispense with titles. The purpose of this hearing... Denny interrupted from Sass's left. Marshal represents settlers to the city. Sass is still my marshal. And how's this a hearing? Judges versus us. Sealed door. Ain't nobody hearing our side of the story. Sass was proud of him. It was hard to be brave in the bizarre environment of a conference room. Denny never sat in such luxury before. Never breathed air so rich and pure and moist. Scented with flowers instead of the caustic alkali of the moonside desert. Theo stared him down. The purpose of this hearing is to understand the events leading to the uprising in Petticreek, and your role in these events, to determine your sentence. We tried to stop it, Drake breathed from Sass's right. She squeezed his hand under the table. The public hearing in front of the settlers left him rattled. His kids sat in the bleachers, seeing their old man in handcuffs. They heckled and jeered at him with all the rest. The gruesome executions were his friends. Agreed, that's why you're still alive. Theo paused a moment to let that sink in. Sass's youngest co-defendants gulped. In exchange for your intelligence, provisional promises were made. Provisional, Sass erupted. You dare! How about everybody shut up and let me finish a sentence? Theo glowered at them all. Sass, you're a marshal. Fine, she was a marshal. You shut up too, Kendra. Sass, your job was to keep the peace between the vills and the city, settlers and herbs. And you did it real well. So how did you get caught up with rebels on the wrong side? Begin at the beginning. When did you join with Landau to overthrow the city? Sass sat back and shook her head. No, that's not where it started. And she began her testimony. The rebellion was born 3 years ago in Schuyler, not Petticreek. Marshal Sass Collier banked around the afflicted area twice in her official flyer through the sparkling, cool, low sunbeams of dawn, the first sun-up day of the week. She wanted to feel the mood of the disaster before she stepped foot in it. Small figures below carried out the dead. As a rule, Settlervilles on the dusty moon were ugly as sin, but Schuyler exceeded even Mahina's exacting standards. The town aspired to become an industrial hub, not farmland. It offered all the mushroom-hued charm of a parking lot. The residential district featured block after block of shipping container homes huddled around an inner courtyard, marching along a treeless circle road. Most kept communal kitchen and sanitary facilities out back, still housed in the geodesic pressure tents used by laborers pre-atmosphere. They bore 40 years of patching with duct tape. The more civic-minded blocks erected a shade awning over a couple picnic tables for folk to sit outside and socialize. Most blocks deployed private sunshades instead, or none. Sass couldn't readily see the end of the blighted district. Beyond the corpse trucks, other blocks seemed devoid of activity, but she spotted a clutch of marshal flyers and banked to land among her own kind. Clay Rocha, their leader, met her as she hopped out of the flyer, leaving their fellow marshals Tom and Sandman leaning on his flyer, kibitzing. Clay, what are we doing here? Orphans. His model-grade features remained cool and detached, all business. Some kids survived while their parents suffocated. She searched his face. Hell of a thing. We're not helping with the dead? We're staying out of it. Potential for explosion. Sass stiffened. What explosives? Where? How do we secure them? Clay grimaced his insufferable condescension. Figure of speech. They're in shock now, but they could turn angry any minute. We stand here for mutual support. Handle the queries. Promise that all orphans will be cared for. By somebody. Somebody who? The city's not going to take them. Mahina Actual, the terraformers' citadel that predated the settlers' arrival, wanted nothing to do with the settler tragedies unfolding around them. They'd said the moon would be ready to accept immigrants a century from now. Earth sent 250,000, far too soon. She couldn't blame the herbs for feeling this wasn't their fault. But Clay contradicted her. Babies can return to the creche. I think I can stretch that to 30 months, age 2.5. Babies lived in the city until delivery to their parents outside on their first birthday. Older kids, those orphans would be the settlers' problem. What about MA's responsibility? This is the biggest airdrop yet. Generating an atmosphere was the terraformers' job. Clay pursed his lips. They are investigating. Why Atmo failed here. I personally keep my emergency air at hand. He patted the breathing kit hung on his hip. It's important to pressure seal your home before bed, that sort of thing. That answer sucks. Few settlers could afford the pressure tents. It's what we have. Clay, it's not a question of what's true. It's our job to mediate between the herbs and settlers. This is one hell of a conflict. He raised an elegant eyebrow dryly. And that's why you called us here, Sass conceded. Right, but standing here all superior won't solve anything. She stalked toward the nearest corpse truck. Collier, stay out of it. You're wrong, Rocha. She knew this beyond a shadow of a doubt. There was a time to be standoffish, and Clay excelled. But today wasn't that time. Sure, the marshals wielded the authority of the city, just like the colony ship crew had backed them on the way here. But the marshals were settlers, not herbs. Time to pitch in and grieve with the masses. She pulled up her dust bandana against the reek of death and nodded to the crew, taking a break at the corpse wagon, riding high on its balloon tires. How can I help? Check houses? The trio of worn laborers looked askance at her, hollow faces like rawhide burned brown by the sun, compared to her own fair, fleshy cheeks under straw blonde hair. Each looked old enough to be her father, yet they were born here, younger than she was when she left Earth. One slowly responded, Marshal, what did this? Don't know yet. The herbs will investigate. All these houses clear? He stared at her a moment longer, under lowered brows. Right side's done. Start on the left. He pointed. She nodded firmly, then hesitated. We'll get answers. In the meantime, you're not wearing a breath kit. She patted her own at her hip. Good reminder to take precautions. You know? Unlike her, they didn't wear gravity generators either, instead working at the native 1/6 G. Not that she'd use hers while she carried a body. He snapped. Yeah, screw you. Gave mine to a little kid in hysterics when I pulled her from her bed tent. Her parents died last night. Sass held up her hands in surrender. My mistake. Sorry. Maybe Clay had been right. The man had that annoying tendency, but she'd chosen her path and she stuck to it, heading solo for the container home he'd indicated. The door was latched inside, a simple drop bar to keep the wind from blowing it open. She slipped in her utility knife to lift it, then pushed the door open with her shoulder. She paused for her eyes to adjust to the dim interior. This was a standard 12-meter box, about 2.5 meters square in cross-section. A heavy curtain blocked off the sleeping section from the living room, centered on a cheap folding table. 4 adult bodies and 2 of their chairs sprawled on the floor. They'd been playing cards over beer. She stepped over a scrawny woman's outflung arm to reach the curtain. Yeah, there were 2 kids, both under school-age size, but they hadn't been in air tents. She pulled out her flashlight to make sure, but found no survivors. She knelt to the youngest, the future of humanity, felled at about age 2. His belly protruded, skinny arms and legs akimbo. A ratty cloth stuffed rabbit lay by his head. She closed his eyes for him, then wrapped him in his sheet for carrying as she'd seen others do from the air. It was easier to detach from the reality from the air, or among Clay's clutch of official flyers. Kneeling here by his thin pallet on the floor, dealing with the indignity of a sheet soiled by death, brought the tragedy home. Maybe the boy's parents hadn't provided a pressure tent to sleep in, but they loved him. And they paid the ultimate price for their mistake. What a waste. Her eyes were streaming as she laid his little wrapped form outside the door. She hadn't even bothered to go off gravity to carry him, such a light burden, Mahina's future. The rabbit hung from her belt, a gift for the next living child she happened across. The corpse trio were off break now and trudged toward her. Her tears earned a grudging nod of respect. The slightest of them bent to pick up the boy. 6 dead in here, haven't checked any other boxes yet. She ducked back inside to wrap the sister. Another man followed to pull out the adults, 2 young couples. Sass expected a nearby box home held the second couple's dead kids, close enough for the parents to hear them cry out. But they wouldn't have. Hypoxia was a sneaky death. It caught you unaware. Yeah, there would be a price to pay for the Skylar airdrop, but it was a while coming.